So we've been discussing in class, we're working through the missional helix, of course, and as you've noticed, I think I talked at the beginning how um, even the class is outlined by the helix. So we spent the last several weeks looking at theological reflection. That's why we talked about Christian worldview with Andy Hughes. That's why we talked about the relationship of theology and culture. That's why we talked about some other kind of foundational theological things. Now we are stepping into, so last week we talked about, the cultural landscape of North America. What does that look like? And so that kind of stepped us into the cultural analysis part of the class. And so this is what we're going to start doing is building some kind of deepening the framework, deepening what we're doing inside of each quadrant. So when you're doing cultural analysis, a big part of that is you're going to be exegeting the culture, and a subcategory of that is exegeting their cultural texts and products. So you can say, oh, let's exegete the culture. Well, what do you mean? Are you trying to ask them about their religious beliefs? Are you asking them about why they do certain practices? Or are you going to look at the newspaper articles or the types of jars that they have created to gather water, depending if you're in the village setting? So we're looking at cultural text. It's almost like a subcategory of understanding and exegeting culture. So next week we're going to be discussing exegeting people. What does it mean to actually get to know and understand a person? And so I think that's going to be an interesting discussion. So today we're looking at exegeting cultural text and products as part of what we do in cultural analysis. And so what you guys will do in your research paper, you will need to include some elements of, so you are, Matt, doing about ecology. So what are some of the cultural texts related to that field? Well, it could very easily be some of the scientific documents or things put out, or even some other maybe commercials or video documentaries highlighting climate change, as it's being called right now. So those will be a cultural text reflecting what is happening. So I want to give a definition of cultural text, and for your quiz and that sort of thing, you will want to know what's here in the bold. And I'm going to share this slide as well, but it's here on the screen for you, Matt. Charlie, do you see the slides okay on your end?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So what are cultural texts? Now, what I have here is a paragraph in the paper of mine that you guys read the very first week of class about the relationship of biblical and cultural exegesis. So that was kind of springboarding us and getting us talking about the idea. So so that was actually a fun paper for me to write because it was my first jump or first taste of, so what are we actually trying to do when we exegete a cultural text? Because we being a Bible college, a seminary, you learn how to exegete scripture, which is a cultural text. We have to remember that. Now, it is a multicultural text because not every single author was in the same time period in the same kind of Israel as what we would know today. And so there were different cultures even reflected in the Bible, though there's kind of an overarching Israeli Jewish culture, but it spans 1,500 years. And so things changed from when Moses wrote in the time of the Exodus to when Paul wrote his epistles. Culture changed. Romans were not even in existence really. When some of maybe the prophets and Moses and some of those, and King David. King David didn't deal with a Caesar. He dealt with other nations and whatnot. So we've been taught how to exegete the biblical text, but we don't always really study and think through how are we going to exegete a cultural text that's outside of something even written. And so when I say the word text, don't automatically think of a book with words in it. Okay, we're thinking of a text. Think of it as a production. So as I define here, as the Bible records the story of God, so a culture's text record the stories, past and present, despairing and hopeful, of that society. They're records. That's why we call them texts. But they can take many forms. Cultural texts are, and here's your definition that you will need to know, cultural texts are the intentional products, for example, movies, music, art, marketing campaigns, buildings, clothing, beauty products, social networking applications, etc., that bear meaning and reflect a culture's narratives, worldview, desires, and hopes. All right? So They bear meaning. There is something when I hold up an iPhone, this thing has meaning to it. There's something to this device. It is a cultural text, okay, and it's a different cultural text from when Bell South was making phones in the 1920s, 30s. So it's similar cultural product, but this has put the word in my pocket. Where the other one, you'd have to call a party line and hope you get to the right person. So, anyways, so therefore, cultural texts, because they are intentionally produced, have meaning and reflect culture. Therefore, they require interpretation. So, when we are doing cultural analysis of a particular area, we are for the purpose of this class, we are planting or replanting or revitalizing a church or something along those lines. It is necessary that we step into that community and start saying, what is the community making and doing that reflects? So even in Winston-Salem, there are different cultural texts that are unique to Winston. Now there are things that are American or that reflect the United States that we would see produced here in Winston. We've had tobacco companies and clothing companies and donuts. Krispy Kreme donuts is unique to Winston, but they're made all over the place now. And so each community will have its own cultural text. So there are kind of macro, bigger picture, bigger reflective text, and then there are more micro kinds. Some things that that are local to Winston, like I think of the Camel City Goods down here on Burke Street. They've got products that they're making. I just drove by there a while ago. They've got specific products that are very Winston-Salem-ish. They reflect some of our buildings or landscape or Old Salem, different things like that. So what are cultural texts? Well, they're just simply products that we make that reflect and even share the story of the cultural narrative. Right? So what are some examples? Now this is by no means exhaustive. This is not the definitive list, but there are some interesting ones I want us to just kind of look at on here. So some examples of cultural text: literature. We can think of books, ebook form. Ebook form is its own. Uber. Newspapers, cell phones, skinny jeans, movies and videos, songs or lyrics. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, social media in itself is a cultural product. Whitening toothpaste. We're going to discuss that in a little bit. Declaration of Independence, PlayStation 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever they're at now. Skinny jeans, coffee tumblers, baseball bats, Harley Davidson motorcycles, Time magazine, Uber cars, which latest killing spree, you may want to rethink that. Jasmine rice. Anyone ever heard of jasmine rice? Yeah, it's Thai. It's actually not American. I asked Mr. Hayes for some things that were just Thai. Like, what is a Thai product? He's like, jasmine rice and skin whitening products. Where we want tanning beds, they want whitening. Thai people want to actually whiten their skin. So that's interesting. That's why I put them back to back. One is very Thai, one's very American, but they're a cultural text or product. Wedding ceremonies. Wedding ceremonies differ across the world. So, why do you think whitening toothpaste would be an example of a cultural text for North America? That's what we're talking about, North America.
Because that's part of beauty in our culture is white teeth versus every other culture in the world. It's like, who cares?
Yep.
Like, I have family who live in England, and their teeth are like, they don't really have dental care like we do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that big of a deal. It's you take care of your mouth just to make sure you don't like rot your teeth so you can eat, but who cares what they look like?
Well, so there's some cultural meaning that, okay, so taking care of our teeth is not as priority as physical exercise or something else, even education. Well, let's think about it even further. I'm drinking a cup of coffee right here. Americans are addicted in many ways to coffees. That is a very popular addiction with the caffeine level. Wine, alcohol, wine does stain teeth and some hot teas and things. So culturally, we drink those things, and they stain our teeth. So I am not yet willing to give up my daily coffee, which I have several times a day, in order to preserve the whiteness of my teeth. My teeth were a little bit whiter in high school than they are now, I can be honest. I saw some old pictures, I'm like, man, my teeth aren't, they're not straight yellow yet. They're working on it. But I have done this little whitening strips before. My wife bought some, I'm like, I'll give them a shot just to see if they kind of work, and I did it like twice and never really did it again. But do you think whitening toothpaste is a big deal to a village in southern Uganda that just wants to have a clean water well? No, not a priority. So whitening toothpaste has, it's boomed in the last couple years. It's strips, toothpaste, and that sort of thing, trying to make it easy. You don't have to go and get laserized by the dentist. Laserized is not a word. I just made it up. So what about movies and videos? How are they an example of a cultural text?
It shows the climate of that culture, like what's popular, like issues, what they view, like when you're talking about superhero movies.
Okay.
Or even
Exactly.
right now in American culture, anything to do with zombies is automatically going to be a good movie. Like they just came up with Pride and Prejudice, and zombies.
And
like,
Pride and Prejudice is my wife's favorite movie and book of all time.
How the heck does that...
It doesn't
but
make
what's
sense.
sad is because in America we're so obsessed with zombies right now, is it'll probably be a hit because people just want to go see anything with zombies. So.
Right. And so what we have to understand about cultural texts is that many of them become trends.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, whitening toothpaste may not be popular forever. Facebook has a shelf life. There will be a day in history. It may not be in our lifetime. I really don't know. There will be a day when Facebook won't exist. Okay, there are things that were started in the 1800s and even in the 1940s and 50s and 60s that they're like, oh, this is going to be around forever. 30 years later, it's gone. Okay, so Charlie, not to pick on you particularly, because I don't know if you do or not. What about skinny jeans? Why do you think skinny jeans are an example of a cultural text when they're clothing?
I'm trying to think. I guess they kind of represent. I don't know. That's what you see people in, and so that's what kind of everyone wants to subscribe to. I know when I was growing up, my dad would buy me like the Walmart Wrangler all one color jeans, and I didn't realize until like high school that those weren't cool anymore.
Yeah, and here's the funny thing. It's a good pair of jeans. It kept you warm. It served their purpose. But then you go to school and it's like everyone else is wearing parachute pants or
Or was it Abercrombie and Fitch and Hollister?
Yeah, so brands. So when I was in middle school to high school, skinny jeans did not really exist. They came when I was more in college. So at that point, there were the bell bottom flares were popular. So all the girls wore these kind of bell bottom flare jeans. Guys still kind of just wore regular jeans unless you were kind of the emo, and then you wore these pants that like you could fit 3 people in one leg. I did not own any of those, but so that was a more of a subcultural thing. But skinny jeans started out as women's clothing, and then I remember in college when it became a big deal when guys were starting to buy women's jeans because guys were starting to wear skinny jeans. So there is a effeminate influence on men because men in American society are becoming less manly, and becoming what Darren Patrick, pastor of the Journey Church, he wrote the book Church Planner. And if you read the book Church Planner, I read this past summer, it's really good. But he talks about bands. They're boys and men. They're in their late 20s, early 30s, but they're very dependent on mom and dad. They don't have a family. They don't have a job. They're not in school. Sitting around playing video games in the basement eating cheese puffs. That's kind of what he calls them. But what it has done is because we have focused so heavily on feminism, which I'm all for women's rights in a lot of ways, not with abortion and things, but with equal opportunities for jobs and whatnot. I think it's all cool and fine. I don't have a big beef with any of that. But because we talk about it so much, now boys and men are saying, well, it's okay now to wear makeup and eyeliner. It's okay to have skinny jeans. So case in point, there is a church in town that I'm good friends with the pastor. I was over at his office picking up something one day. They had an intern. He was a new intern. Guy's about 22, 23 years old. And he wanted to be a church planner one day. And so they had him in there. He was finishing up some studies. He's not studying here at Piedmont, so you wouldn't know him. But he was finishing up a degree in business or something and wanted to plant a church. So while he was doing that, he was already married. He had been married for just a few months when I met him. And I met him last year sometime. And he had eyeliner around his eyes. And so, dude, so I'm sitting there thinking, like, what? Like, you want to be a church planner, do that. But there's this okayness with having a little bit more femininity as a man. So we started wearing skinny jeans. Now, I will admit I bought a pair of skinny jeans. Now, they were not skin tight. The reason is I have chicken legs, and
normal jeans look
skinny
baggy.
Jeans.
I feel you, me too.
So skinny jeans on me look like almost normal jeans. They actually fit. So what I do is I buy, they label skinny or slim. I think they're slim. Yeah,
these are.
They're slim.
See, they're still baggy on me.
Yeah, exactly. So because I have chicken legs, they look normal on me. They don't look like skinny jeans. So
people don't think I'm wearing skinny jeans.
I will admit to that right now. But what? Coffee tumblers. Well, we have this infatuation with coffee, and so there may be other countries where you don't see a lot of coffee tumblers because they drink their coffee in the morning in quiet or with family or something like that. Where we're always on the go. Everything in America is on the go. Um, so you talked about we referenced movies, the superhero movies, different things, cell phones, smartphones, but literature. I put literature first because the go-to standard, if you want to find out what a culture is saying, is look at what they're writing. Right now, it used to be just look at the books and the newspaper. Now you have to look at books, newspaper, blog posts, social media posts, tweets. You have to look at more than just a physical printed book or a newspaper to look at the actual text and the words that people are writing. But right now, if you have any kind of app like Flipboard or the Apple News or anything like that that gives you a news feed, right now the big thing is all about the election. So that's almost its own cultural text in a way of the election. Hashtag. The hashtag is a cultural text because it is something reflected. We were doing social media. They wanted to find a way to connect and even do searches within tweets and things. So the guy invented the hashtag, and it has revolutionized the sentence. I think differently now. So now if I'm reading a book, like when I was reading Facing the Change a couple months ago, there were some hashtags that I wrote in here. I would do a hashtag contextualization on the flyleaf because what does that tell me? I didn't have to write anything else but just hashtag contextualization on the
subject matter.
I know what he's talking about. Yeah, it's something that when I'm flipping through, like, oh, he's talking about contextualization here. I want to read this section again. And so, but I never used a hashtag when I was an undergrad. I never put a number sign. I saw them on my phone, but I never used them for anything. They were just the pound sign you did whenever you had to, make a collect call or something. Do you guys even know what a collect call is? 10-10-220. You don't even know what 10-10-220 is. I bet Jeremy Roeder and Derek Sullivan, who are students closer to my age in this class, they will know what 10-10-220 was. Google it. It's a historical artifact from like 2001. All right? So it's a way that you did collect calls before cell phones and all these kind of plans and whatnot. So anyways, these are some examples of some cultural text. I want you to see that they're more than just written products, but all these things in some way reflect, PS4, put it on there because the gaming industry is huge. It's huge. Multi-billions are being spent, and the biggest purchasers right now, the biggest market is actually men in their 30s. Is the biggest video game market right now, which is scary sad. I'm not against video games. We have a Wii system. I haven't played it in 10 months since the baby has been born.
I sold my Xbox.
Yeah, so anyways, wedding ceremonies, they're very different. So these are some cultural texts. Most of these are American related. The jasmine rice and skin whitening products are Thai related, thanks to Mr. Hayes. So here's what I want us to do. Let's just take the last few minutes of class, and I want us to do an exercise together of actually working through the helix, and let's start formulating. So what are the questions that we should be asking when we are examining a cultural text? Okay, so I told you these lectures will be more interactive. So guys, get your thinking caps on. I'm going to take my last sip of coffee. And what we're going to do, I'm going to open up my original so we can edit it. There it goes. Don't need you.
Is that you in that picture?
Up here? Yeah, that's me. I need to change. That's my Blackboard Collaborate picture. Oh, no, I didn't want to open that. Come on now. Where is my... There he goes. Okay, so here we go. Let me move this over a little bit. All right, so let's think through together, based off what we've discussed here in the class, what are some theological reflection questions when you are looking at any kind of cultural text or product? So think through the list that we just looked at, and what are some, let's think of a very general question at first that's theologically. I can think of one, but I want you guys to think for our last few lectures as well.
I guess you could ask, like, how is it derived at its most basic from the Bible, What are some themes in it that, I don't know, are like redeeming qualities?
Okay, okay, okay. I like that. So we can say, um, how does the text groan for redemption? Maybe
Hmm.
since we kind
Yeah.
of have that lingo, that language in the Bible, culture grow, the cosmos. Um, one I was thinking of from you guys had this on your exam is are cultural products inherently evil? No. So I think that would be something that we want to reflect theologically on. Now, are there some like can we say that a sword is a cultural product? We don't use swords in warfare anymore, but King David would have. Um, so write that down. Our cultural products inherently evil. Well, biblically speaking, we would say no, they're not. But we want to, as we were processing this, we want to think a little more deeply about it. We would want to say, you know what, this specific text is never really been used for good. Which I can't really think of anything that would have that, but there's something could exist. So, what other, as we're reflecting on theology, and we're thinking about contextualization, what other questions would we want to ask?
You just mean like what does Scripture say about it?
Yeah, yeah. What does Scripture say about what humans create? These don't have to be questions. These can be some statements as
Like,
well.
is it from God or is it from man? Or like is I'm trying to think how to narrow it down. I don't think of the word I'm trying to say. Like, because we did the inherently evil, so then it's like you look at the motivation behind it. Like, is it? Brain fart.
Well, I think I'm tracking maybe where you're going. I put, do we have an example of it in the Bible?
Yeah, yeah, like that, or
Okay.
even like. I'm trying to think of it. Like, for instance, when you think of the Tower of Babel and the motivation, like, you read that text, it's like, what's so wrong? But then you look at the motivation of why they built the Tower of Babel, man trying to make their own program, make themselves like God. So then, basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, some of our society, it's like as though it's a constant, you look at the theme of Scripture and you look at the theme of, like, American society right now, and the universal all truth is truth. We're trying to divert further and further away from truth because it's like we're trying to divert further away from our moral consciousness because we're basically trying to get rid of that.
In a way, we're creating our own intellectual babble.
Yeah.
That's humanism.
Mm-hmm.
Secular humanism is creating its own babble
Or
because we
like,
don't need God anymore. We can reach.
Or even like Rome and how Rome tried to be its own holy city. Like, I'm trying to think of how to word it, but like I said, I'm struggling down on the struggle bus. But like, for instance, Augustine's City of God. He talks about the two different cities: City of Man, City of God. City of Man is everything man builds in man's image and all the corruptness, and the City of God, which is perfect. And basically, how Rome blamed Christianity for the fall, for the fall of Rome. And Augustine's like, no, so basically, like, you worship all these pagan gods and all this stuff. And I guess what I'm trying to go with this, I'm trying to think of a question. How does society's view of human rights and or even the image of God?
Yeah, I like the image of God better.
Like, for instance, in the baby, like abortion.
Okay, yeah, there we go. So Planned Parenthood is a cultural text. Okay, so now we got to put it in the words we understand.
I need coffee too.
How do we see the image of God?
Yes, yeah. See. Like 3 midterms a day or something like that.
It's okay. And Charlie, feel free to just start talking whenever you think of something as well. I just had another one here. We have God actually commands His people to go into Canaan and actually create a nation. Build walls, build cities,
kill all
farms. So we see that God actually commands His people to create cultural products. Let's and And Charlie, if you have any, if you think of one that needs to go back, I can just hop back in. But let's look at cultural analysis. What are questions over here that we need to be asking, or what are some statements that we can make? Let's say we have the cultural product. We are examining whitening toothpaste.
Okay.
All right. So what are the questions or statements as we are analyzing that piece of cultural text?
Why do white teeth matter? Or
Why?
is it a sense of beauty now? Like, just like when it comes to Victoria's Secret models, dare I say, why is it that? I mean, it's the same issue of that. Why is it that a woman has to be, 5'9" and skinny to be considered, or fit? I guess is the term they use, to be considered beautiful. So she has to be tall, but not too tall, but she can't be too short.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like with teeth. Why is it that teeth need to be perfectly straight and white when teeth are made for eating food?
Okay, so I kind of summarized why is a product valuable right now, right?
Yeah.
Charlie, go ahead and pull up that PDF I emailed you, and I printed us copies,
Yes.
Matt. So let me go grab those off the printer. Forgot to grab them a second ago. All right, so this was in the paper of mine that I had you read, but so Kevin Van Hooser's book Everyday Theology really is the only work out right now that really covers this idea of cultural exegesis and even looking at products well. And so he gives this. I created a comparison chart to kind of show how a lot of the questions and things he was saying mirror what we talk about when we are doing biblical exegesis. So hermeneutical principles, expository preaching, and so forth. There are a lot of similarities between the two. So I created this chart, and Charlie, you should have that, and I'll upload it in Blackboard for you online, fellas. But let's look at it and see if it gives us any good framing questions that we can ask related to cultural analysis and even historical perspective. So his first guiding principle is try to comprehend a cultural text on its own terms before you interpret it. So, in other words, let's not just jump into saying white toothpaste is just a marketing ploy to get people to buy more toothpaste, even though it kind of probably is, but it's still reflective of an image-driven culture.
Well,
right?
Because, not to get to Joan, my cousin's a dentist, and some whitening toothpaste actually all it does is whiten your teeth, doesn't actually protect them. It just whitens them, and it could wear them down. So
then you're sacrificing something, but he's just saying try to comprehend it on its own terms.
Okay.
Before you say, okay, let's interpret it. So, in other words, okay, here's a good example. If you remember, about this time last year, Hosier's song "Take Me to Church" came out. All right, remember this "Take Me to Church" by Hosier, and pretty strong lyrics, scathing very much against the church in a lot of ways, pushing the LGBTQ agenda here, especially in America, even though he is from UK. But anyways. The first time I heard that song, you as a Christian, you almost want to be outraged.
Mm-hmm.
At first, and I think this is what Van Hoover is saying here, try to comprehend a cultural text on its own terms before you interpret it. The first time I heard on the radio, I had to get my phone out and do the SoundHound app and I'm like, oh, I need to find out who sings this. Let me look at the lyrics. And at first you start listening to it, like, man, I'm kind of mad. But then I actually almost became sympathetic towards Hosier because, first of all, you realize he's a lost person who doesn't understand what the church really should be. And then I start feeling about, man, why is that the image of church that he's gotten? So so kind of thinking, let me understand his cultural text, his song. Let me listen to it. And so what I did was, after I heard it 2 or 3 times, I went and looked him up and found another video of why he wrote the song. And I'll try to post those in Blackboard. They're really informative. So it has actual music video, which is very powerful. It's just strong imagery and lyrics. But why he wrote the song is just as powerful. And so I wanted to understand why he was doing things before I stepped into just breaking it down and saying, oh, here's all the 8 points that he's wrong. I am glad that Hosier wrote that song and put it out, because I think it could be a good wake-up call for churches who are not handling the LGBTQ issues well. If you're a pastor and you're not willing to have gay friends, then you should question your call to ministry, because Jesus hung out with sinners. I'm not saying you have to have gay friends in order to be a pastor, because some may not. But if you're not even willing, yeah. But anyways, so how can we frame that into a question? Comprehend a culture text. Maybe we can say understand the text before trying. Well, not before trying to interpret it. Yeah, we can say that. Because understanding and interpreting are kind of the same thing. Do we have a better word than understand? We said comprehend. Let's just use his words. Comprehend the text before trying to interpret. That's probably better to say.
Yeah.
Number 2 is a little bit confusing unless you know what he means by its illocutionary act. You just have to read that section. Okay, well here's a comparison with I did Aiken, Curtis, and Rumage's in their book on engaging exposition. It's a preaching book. It's a preaching book that is very hermeneutically driven. So they have a lot of hermeneutical principles in it.
Is that
But Denny Aiken, yeah. So in their book, they kind of listed the 10 basic principles of hermeneutics, and Van Hooser had his 10 guiding guidelines for interpreting culture. And so I went through, and actually they all really compare out and match almost really well, not in order, but pretty well. So when we're trying to comprehend a cultural text on its own terms before we interpret it, we're also understanding that the primary goal of hermeneutics is the discovery of the author's intended meaning. So look at that cultural text intended meaning. What is the intended meaning behind skinny jeans? Well, it's a fashion issue that really started out with women having another way in cold weather when you're wearing jeans to show off the curves of their body. I mean, that you can say it that way. There's many others. That is one of the things that it really is a practical thing. It shows off their curves, and they can do it year round when they don't have to wait till summer or spring to be able to show off their legs or whatever. And so it really reflects the sad part of an image-driven culture and a sex-driven culture. But anyways, I'm not slamming women. My wife has skinny jeans, but they're not skin tight like they're painted on. They just fit her better. She likes this style. So I'm not here to bash. So, okay, number 3, he says, consider the world behind, of, and in front of the cultural text. So basically, understand it holistically. Don't just look at skinny jeans and say, like what I just did, of it's only for sex-driven things. Like it's only a reflection of sex-driven culture. That is one aspect. A cultural text is multifaceted. You have to look at it from different angles. So that's what he's kind of hitting at here. And the hermeneutical principle that matches the author's intended meaning in a biblical text is always discovered within its own unique cultural context. In other words, understand the text in its context. So let's maybe make that a point. So interpret the text, understanding its multiple facets. Is that pretty good, maybe? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so number 6, I think, is a good one. Be comprehensive in your interpretation of a cultural text. Find corroborative evidence that makes best sense of the whole as well as the parts. So we can say whitening toothpaste again. There's also the mouthwash that's whitening. You can go to the dentist and he can do something. There's whitening strips. So understand that it's not a standalone one-hit thing. There are many, it's almost kind of that multifaceted part. But what he's saying is, don't look at just whitening toothpaste to understand what it's saying about culture. Study what dentists are saying about teeth whitening. Study why people are wanting their teeth to be whitened. Study how strips and different ones work or don't work. Study how reviews on Amazon are affecting the sales of Dentine versus Aquafresh. You want to study all the even the spider leg things that kind of stick out from the main thing to understand it holistically. So I'm going to put holistically underneath the other one because it really kind of fits there. And then match it with the Bible, the biblical interpretation. The author's intended meaning in a biblical text may have a fuller meaning, but that meaning can only be determined on the basis of subsequent biblical revelation in the whole canon. In other words, don't pick half a verse of Scripture and build a big doctrine on half of that verse. Compare Scripture with Scripture. That's exactly what Van Hooser is saying here with the cultural text, compare cultural text with cultural text in order to understand them. So superhero movies, how do we apply to that? If we want to compare, how do we look at superhero movies, Marvel versus DC? If we're trying to understand, like what I remember, what I was hitting at with the Batman trilogy was post 9/11. There's a fear that we need a hero.
Yeah. Okay,
so if you want to understand that, you have to look outside of Batman. You got to look at the Avengers. Batman was a standalone guy by himself. He didn't need nobody. But the Avengers, the individual movie, they sort of, oh, we're better together. We can fight the biggest world threats together. Think of the UN. We can fight the biggest world threats together. Or the Justice League that is forthcoming and coming out here in just a few weeks.
You have to deal with the question of how powerful. It's too powerful. Just like the questions in our society then with government. How strong should government be? How much power should your government have, especially when it comes to like a police state?
Yeah.
At what point does it become protecting the people to scaring the people?
So look what we just did. We started talking about 9/11 and Batman, and we just talking about a police state because they relate. So that's what he's hitting
Especially
at here.
Right now in our country with the issue of police.
Yeah.
That's a topic
thing.
that I never thought would be an issue, but within the past year, it's almost become a job that's almost you're going to see people aren't maybe going to want as much now. It went from being a civil service and honor to
be a police officer.
You're hated by a lot of people. They view you as.
So then you're going to have young guys who, for years, wanted to be a police officer. Maybe Stormers are saying it's not going to be worth it because I'm going to have to wear a body cam. Every time I talk to someone who's of a different race, I'm going to be, 20 people going to have their cell phones out waiting for me to do something. Even when a police officer has to do some things, he has to do some stuff. He has to take down a guy if he's becoming a threat to people. It doesn't matter if it's what his race is. If he's got to take down a guy, he's got to take down a guy.
But now you have to be careful, and police officers almost have to be mindful of that and almost pick your battles.
So then here's a deep issue that may even be a good research paper for future students. You guys are way too far into yours. But what about social media videos of police brutality? How do you exegete that because it doesn't give the full context? They turn on their phone and start recording when things heat up. They don't always record the conversation where the person was very peaceful and the cop overreacted, or vice versa, where the cop was very peaceful and very patient, and the person did something, all of a sudden, they just get the film of the takedown, and that's all they have. And so the media runs with what they have, but it's understanding, it's not looking at all the facts. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so let's look at some historical perspective. What are some things if we're looking at cultural texts and understanding them historically? This should be an easy one.
How is the culture historically?
Okay. Well, that's the general question overall, but let's relate it to the actual text.
The toothpaste.
Okay. So how has toothpaste evolved? So how has the text itself evolved and changed? There was a time when toothpaste makers were not worried about having whitening products in their toothpaste.
It's just to clean the food out of your teeth.
It was to clean your teeth and put a lot of fluoride in to protect them from stains or from enamel breakdown, that sort of thing. But now that itself is changing. So how has the text itself evolved and changed? And we can also say we can say we can make this as a statement. Cultures tend to create bigger and better of the same text. So it wasn't enough that we had newspapers. Now that we have blogs, digital newspapers, other news source apps, we go for the bigger and better. We used to have regular phones. You know what? People in the 80s, well, I think there were some big block cell phones maybe in the 80s. Let's go to the 50s. People in the 50s were content with having one phone hooked up on the wall in their house. They were content with that. Now, we're not content unless we have a smartphone that goes with us everywhere, and we don't even think twice about having a regular phone in our house anymore.
We get pissed when we get charged for data because then we can't look up stuff on the internet.
Exactly. So anyway, so those are some historical things, realizing that we tend to create bigger and better. So then So what does the future of the cell phone look like? Well, we've always seen it in the Apple, like Apple Watch, smart watches, that sort of thing, wearable technology. So now a block or rectangle phone like this may one day become irrelevant. It may not even be needed because it's going to evolve. So cultural texts are always evolving, and so we need to study the history. We need to go back. Why were cell phones even invented? Was there another purpose? So the purpose of the computer was not to link everyone globally. The purpose of the computer was actually to figure out like random numerical codes and things. Like the original computers were not meant to actually do what they do today, but they evolved and they become what they have today. So you want to look at why was social media originally invented? Why was Facebook originally invented? It was so students at Harvard could see each other and see their own profiles, basically so guys could check out girls and they could have a place. That's what Facebook was created for. It was not created to be a money-making marketing machine that has united over 1 billion people digitally, but it became that. So anyways, we just realized how it has evolved and changed. So strategy formation. What are some thoughts from you guys about what we need to do with cultural text and products? After we've understood one, we're trying to understand teeth whitening and cell phones. Do we preach against teeth whitening? No, but what do we preach?
All the underlying meaning of the reason of it, like why. So basically, the underlying cause of why do people think we need whitening teeth?
Exactly.
Or white, not whitening, but white teeth. Like, why is it that is, like, if you're a guy and a girl, it's like, oh, that girl's nice, she loves Jesus, oh, but she doesn't wear skinny jeans to show off her hair, or she doesn't have white teeth, so she's unattractive.
Right.
So, yeah, okay.
I think we should use them to like inform our message. Like I think of like when Billy Graham was doing all his evangelism, he was successful because there were like that's a time where people were seekers, and now I think we've transitioned to where people don't really care anymore. Like they're not seeking; they're just ignorant and on purpose, and they're content with that.
Yeah.
So we have to change the message because they're not seeking it out anymore.
Yeah, I mean, this goes into preaching, disciple making, evangelism, anything. Let them inform our practice. And I think part of the strategy formation is use them to our advantage. Let's use Facebook in a redemptive way. So let's just say instead of using to our advantage, redeem them for good use. I had another one that I just thought about. Oh, I know. So remember we talked about a definition of cultural text is that they reflect the narrative of the culture. Teeth whitening, skinny jeans reflect the image-driven, sex-driven aspect of culture. But what if we as Christians created cultural texts that reflect the gospel narrative? For instance, I'm trying to think of something like Tom's shoes.
Okay.
They were shoes. They became stylish,
and they were huge there for a while.
and they were huge. They were trendy. I mean, they still make them, but they had a really, really good redemptive purpose. Now, I'm not sure. I never owned a pair. My foot actually could not fit in one. I tried. My wife has had a few pair. But in a way, their cultural text, their shoe, their product really reflects because they want to give shoes to needy kids.
Yeah. Because right now in American society, among our generation, millennials, is, though it's not Christian in a sense, it's doing good. Any kind of humane outreach is like totally in right now. It's just like Warby Parker. A lot of people are getting their glasses from them because it's like you buy a pair and then don't they give a pair?
Buy a pair, give a pair, yeah.
They give a pair to someone in like India or something who can't afford eye care and stuff like that.
And so, I mean, and Christians are doing that. So, what if we were encouraging our people? What would it look like for a church in Winston-Salem to have Christians and believers create Winston-Salem-ish products and cultural texts that had redemptive themes to it. And I'm off the top of my head, I really can't think of one. But what if we were asking that question, and then what you're doing here, even in helping your people become missionaries in their community, which is the whole point of contextualization, you're training people to become wise missionaries who are carrying the Bible faithfully into culture. But what if you were preaching this from the pulpit or discipling this way or putting it out on the church's Facebook feed or whatever it was, and you were saying things like, hey, we're going to take $1,000, and if you have an entrepreneurial idea for something that our community needs, and you can create a community garden that is that homeless people are able to tend and work, and they get the food from it because there's a homeless issue on this side of Winston, something like that. And your church is saying, and we want to give you startup money to do that. The Summer Church in Durham does that. They don't start a lot of ministries as a church. They throw out, they actually give their people in their small groups freedom to say, you know what, what are your people actually seeing and feeling that's going on in your communities? And I'm in class with one who they did this. There was something that they saw a big need for that no other nonprofit was really hitting at. So they started engaging on a small scale, but it started to grow. Their community group was weekly engaged in this, and their church saw it and actually gave them like $10,000 startup money to get a nonprofit started. And actually, it became its own nonprofit a few years ago. I can't remember exactly what they dealt with, but it was really cool. So what if our churches were encouraging creating cultural text and products and nonprofits and businesses that had the purpose and the end goal of spiritual formation, much like the Helix. So, well, guys, that is all for today. I think that was a good exercise. Feel good about kind of working through it, see how we're formulating questions and thinking through. A lot of times you got to just draw out the squares, start writing some questions, jotting down some statements. Is what you're doing in your blog posts and discussion boards. I want you to practice doing this because, as you saw today, we just applied the missional Helix to skinny jeans. So if we can apply it to skinny jeans, we can apply it to our gospel-centered ministries. Guys, take care. That's going to end our lecture for today.